Okay, we're into micro unit 6 and we're heading towards the end now because there's only 8 units in the entire semester. So the light is at the end of the road. This one's about monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So just to put us into perspective, where we've been talking about pure monopoly in the last unit, and we're jumping across the continuum back to monopolistic competition at first, and then we're going to talk about oligopolies. So the idea is that we looked at the two extremes of market models, perfect competition, the extreme ideal, and monopoly, the extreme bad situation. And where we're going now, monopolistic competition and oligopolies, is really where most businesses are. There's very few examples of really pure competition. There's really few examples of pure monopoly. Most businesses lie somewhere in between. So let's talk about what it means to have monopolistic competition. And in fact, this is the market model that you probably come in contact with the most. Anytime you go to the mall or go out to some strip mall or go to some store, 9 times out of 10, you're probably dealing with a monopolistic competitor. So monopolistic competition characteristics, first off, a large number of sellers. So in this sense, it's a lot like perfect competition, which also had a large number of sellers. Think dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of sellers. Now the difference between monopolistic competition and pure competition is the fact that monopolistic competitors have differentiated products. Remember that perfect competitors were all selling exactly the same thing. Monopolistic competitors are selling kind of the same thing, but they're different. So for example, shoes or sneakers, right? In one sense, they're all the same. They go on your feet. Most of them have laces. But in another sense, they're all different, right? Different styles, different sizes, different qualities. That's what it means to have a differentiated product, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Third characteristic, again, a lot like perfect competition, easy entry and exit. These are businesses that are relatively easy to get into and relatively easy to get out of. So for example, if I wanted to open, let's say a food place, relatively easy to get into, not that expensive to lease some space. I could even maybe have a food truck and that'd be even less expensive. Also easy to get out of, as opposed to, for example, the airline industry. There's a good reason that I'm not running my own airline. Takes billions of dollars. That's not free entry. That's hard to get into. And then finally, the fourth characteristic, non-price competition, which again means competing with others based on something other than price. So based on maybe the location that you have, or the services that you offer, or the fact that you do advertising. Since monopolistic competitors' products are differentiated from one another's, they do a lot of advertising to kind of highlight those differences. That's one example of non-price competition. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what it means to have a large number of sellers. One implication of that is that each firm is going to have a relatively small market share. If you have hundreds or thousands of firms, it's unlikely that any one firm is going to be selling more than 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5% of all the goods sold in that market. One implication of that is that there's no collusion. Remember, collusion means agreement among firms to kind of try to profit maximize together. Maybe an agreement on what price they're going to charge, or an agreement on what quantity they're going to produce. Since there's so many firms and each one has a relatively small market share, it's really hard for them to get together and form any agreements that are going to last. And that means that each of the monopolistic competitors are going to act independently. They're not going to talk to each other to come up with a mutual price. They're not going to talk to each other to come up with a mutual advertising campaign. Each monopolistic competitor is basically on their own and making their own decisions. Okay, I want to also talk a little bit more about how one might differentiate one's products. Now, maybe the easiest way to differentiate your product is to differentiate your product. In other words, make the attributes of the product different than your competitors. So a good example of this would be the Big Mac and the Whopper, right? They're both hamburgers. Theoretically, they both contain beef, although that's debatable. But they're different, right? The Big Mac has the special sauce, 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. And the Whopper has, well, just a lot of stuff. So that's one way you can differentiate your product. Another way you can differentiate your product is just based on the service that the store offers. So, for example, if I need a can of corn, I can go down to Cub Foods and I can buy a can of corn probably for like 80 cents. And when I do that, I'll be walking on, linoleum floors. I'll have to go find it myself. When I bring it to the cash register, they'll scan it through and then it'll go down the little conveyor belt, and then I'll have to run really quickly to the end of the conveyor belt and bag it myself, like some sort of migrant worker. On the other hand, if I want a can of corn and I go to Byerly's or Lund's, or actually near me is Kowalski's, I have an entirely different experience. I walk into the store, there's like chandeliers happening, there's like mood music and nice lighting. I'm walking on carpeting, it feels really good. I bring it to the checkout and they scan it through, and there's someone waiting with like a little cart to take it to my car. And I don't know what they do with these poor teenagers that are there to take stuff to your car, but they get really nervous if you take stuff yourself. Uh, I was there the other week and I forgot what I was buying, but it was like a box of Tic Tacs, and it was very obvious that I could take it to my own car. And they put it in the cart, and he was like, "Oh, I could help this to you. I could help you to your car." And I was like, "No, I think I got it." And he's like, "No, man, just let me help you bring this to your car." And I was like, "What did they do to you people if you don't help?" He's like, "Just let me bring the thing to your car, man." And he was like looking around, really nervous. I think they beat them or something if they don't offer to bring stuff to your car. But anyway, that's the same product basically bought at different places, differentiated by the level of service that you're getting. Another way you can differentiate your product is just based on location. If I don't want to drive all the way to Kowalski's, which is like a mile away, I can go to a convenience store and pay like $47 for a can of corn, if I just want the convenience of the location. Another way you can differentiate your product, brand names and packaging. Just consider generic cereals and name brand cereals. They're basically the same thing. Sugar, high fructose corn sugar, corn syrup, and other kinds of corn sugars. Um, and I always love the name differentials. So like for Fruit Loops, they have Fruit Spins. Uh, I think for Lucky Charms one time, I saw something like Fortunate Symbols or something. Um, it's basically the same product, but you could charge a lot more if you call them Fruit Loops, right? Just based on the brand name or the packaging of it. Another way you can differentiate your product, and I talked a little bit about this, is just by advertising. You might have the same exact product, but if you advertise it in a different way or can convince consumers that it's somehow different just based on its advertising, you've essentially differentiated your product, even if your product isn't that different. Now, the reason all this stuff is important is because all of this stuff means that monopolistic competitors are going to have some control over price. And in this way, they're very unlike perfect competitors and a little bit more like monopolies. You can think of a monopolistic competitor as having a monopoly for its own product, right? If you're Nike, you have a monopoly on Nike shoes, and they have very specific characteristics. Now, there's lots and lots of substitutes, and if your price goes too high, people will buy Reeboks or Adidas or something else. But if you can convince people that your product's awesome, or you have a good location, or any one of those things, you've effectively differentiated your product from others, and that gives you some ability to control your price. And that's going to have implications graphically as we talk about how monopolistic competitors choose the price that they charge, the quantity that they produce, and etc. And I think we're going to be getting to that next time. So I'll just stop it there.
Stan? Stan?
Hang on, guys. My dad wants something.
Stan!
What?
You've been on your computer all weekend. Shouldn't you go out and socialize with your friends?
I am socializing, Artard. I'm logged on to an MMORPG with people from all over the world and getting XP with my party using TeamSpeak.